Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 308 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today's show is sponsored by the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor and by the Omnipod tubeless insulin pump. You can find out more about the Omnipod at myomnipod.com/juicebox. And at that link, you'll be able to order an absolutely free, no obligation demonstration pod that will be sent directly to you. If you'd like to hear more about the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor, that link is dexcom.com/juicebox. All of the links are in the show notes and at juiceboxpodcast.com, just in case you can't remember them. I have tried to record this opening 6 times. It has not gone right once, so maybe me admitting that out loud will help the 7th chance. Sarah's on the show today to tell us about her daughter's diagnosis. The diagnosis happened in South Korea because the family lived there because Sarah's husband is active duty military. So it's very interesting to hear about the diagnosis as it happened in South Korea and how the family quickly got back to the United States. There's some twists and turns along the way and even a kitten, but none of that explains why this episode is called Psyco-glycemia. This weekend, I'm going to be in Atlanta speaking at the JDRF Type 1 Nation event. I think it's sold out. I'm sorry, but however, I'm very excited to see those of you who are able to get tickets. The next thing I'm doing is in Wisconsin. That still has tickets available. So I'll be in Wisconsin on March 26th. It's a Thursday evening. I will be speaking from 5 p.m. until 8:30 p.m. all about being bold with insulin. I'm going to talk all about the tools, how to use them, get people going in a better direction, hopefully. You can go to ardensday.com/events to learn more. Please remember that even though most of this story happens in South Korea, nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Please always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin.
My name is Sarah Beth Bottrell, and I am an active duty spouse. My husband is in the Army, and our daughter, Adelyn, who is 7, has type 1 diabetes.
Okay. And you have 15 other children, is that correct?
No, I have a total of 4 daughters.
Wow. Did you have triplets or 2 sets of twins?
No. We actually had 2 canceled deployments is how that happened.
You're just talking about free time? Is that what we're looking at here?
Yeah, pretty much. Jeff was in town. That's what happened.
Well, I have to tell you, I'm going to join the military immediately if that's how this works. Yeah, I've never been drawn to service until I realized that it creates a lonely woman that I can visit once in a while.
Pretty much. That is accurate.
Well, don't tell the kids that. Make up something about you wanted to have kids and you really loved the first one and couldn't get enough. You'll find a way to get through it. Can you really? You imagine that when they get much older, Sarah, and you're like, like a wizened veteran of life, and you're like in your 50s, and they're like, why are there 4 of us? And you're like, your father wasn't home a lot. They're going to have this horrified look on their face for a second, and then Thanksgiving dinner will just go on as normal.
I'm going to traumatize them.
Yeah, they're going to picture you in that moment still doing that, and they're just going to be like, oh my God, do you think they still do it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's nice. And you're going to say, why do you think it's stovetop stuffing? I didn't have time. For the real
pretty
thing.
much.
Yeah.
I have time for nothing.
Well, Sarah, you're a player. I think that's what we've learned right off the bat, and we're going to get going. So you are stationed, or your husband is stationed in South Korea when your daughter's diagnosed.
That is correct. We were actually all in South Korea. So when you get orders to go to South Korea, you can do one of 2 things. You can go what they call unaccompanied and go by yourself. And that usually you are going to be there for a year. Mm-hmm. Or you can go accompanied and bring your family. And Jeff and I chose to go as a family because he had actually just returned from a 9-month rotation in Korea. So he was gone for 9 months. He came home for about 4 months, and then we went back to Korea as a family.
Now, Sarah, that's what he told you. He wanted you to all come along so you could be together. He really just didn't want a fifth kid. And he thought, if I can't afford 5 children. If I go to South Korea and come back a year from now, I know where this is going.
Yes.
Right. You guys,
yes.
bringing you and the children to South Korea was birth control. And you're,
right.
that's how I'm saying this. That's what I'm thinking. Anyway, so that's, when you choose a deployment that's with your family, does that mean more time? Or no?
Yes. So when you take your family, you've pretty much committed to 2 years while you're over there.
Makes sense. Moving cost.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So we went, and we had spent a year, and Jeff was offered another job that would be a 2-year commitment. So in order to take that job, he had to actually extend and do a total of 3 years in Korea, which we were on board for. And we went with that. We decided to come home over the summer after the first full year in Korea just to visit family. And I didn't notice Adelyn, her symptoms at that time, but it was immediately after we returned to Korea to do that second year that, she started having all of the basic symptoms. And I took her in to a doctor, and it's very hot, very humid in the summer in Korea. In fact, one of our friends, when we first moved there, had said, this is the hottest you will ever be and the coldest you will ever be at this duty station.
Terrific.
Yeah, right. So, so it was summer, we were rounding out summer and ready to go back to school. And I noticed she was urinating a lot. She was losing some weight, just all of the basic symptoms that, typically show up. So I took her into the doctor, and they thought it was just the heat, the humidity. Was warm. She was drinking more. She would produce more urine. She was growing. She was getting taller, but she was losing weight. So they just thought, push some more. Yeah, and push some more fat in her diet, stuff like that. So then we were on the playground, and Adelyn fell off the slide and busted her chin open and had to get some stitches. So we had to take her to a local hospital off post there. And they gave her a form of an antibiotic that she had the stitches. They gave her some antibiotics, an injection of it, and she broke out in a rash. And this is right before she was diagnosed, maybe 2 weeks. We took her in. Again, she's at this point now, she's very frail. We're seeing bones. It's
oh my gosh,
it's significant what she's lost. And
may I stop you right there at that
sure.
At that juncture when you're like looking at ribs and things like that? Are you saying to yourself, like, are you and your husband speaking to each other and saying, look, there's something incredibly wrong with her? Or what's the level of?
Yes, I actually had brought up diabetes 3 times at the doctor's. And I know I'm not faulting anyone, because I know it's something that's often overlooked, that, we don't get it right the first time.
Okay.
So it just happened that all of these other things were going on at the same time, that is why she was overlooked.
Yeah.
So she broke out in the rash. I took her back to the doctor. I said, something's off. She's at this point not feeling well. And they thought it was the antibiotic, which was typically an antibiotic that they don't give to kids or don't maybe prescribe in the U.S. often, because it is reactive. So they thought that was part of this antibiotic that she had been given. And then they just said they thought that she had, picked up a virus while she was in the hospital.
So it kept being excuses for what you could see right in front of you, but that wasn't leading you to answers. What was the waiting like? Was there expectation like, oh, this is getting better because we've done this thing, or this will get better because we've taken this step? Or were you at that point just staring and thinking, we're not really doing anything and she's getting worse?
Right. So as a couple weeks later, we run into Halloween. And, every kid is excited about Halloween. Adelyn did not, at this point, she just wasn't herself. She didn't even want to do we lived in these towers and there were 3 of them side by side and multiple floors, like 12, 13 floors, depending on the building. So lots of apartments, tons of candy. And she ended up just doing our building. And then she went back in and laid on the couch. She didn't want to do the additional 2 buildings with the other girls, and totally not like her.
Yeah.
And so from Halloween on, she pretty much laid on that couch. She was very lethargic. It was a Saturday morning, and I got up and I said to Jeff, I feel like I'm watching her die. Something's not right. And so I called the doctor and said, she's very lethargic. And that was the key word that threw everybody off. And they were like, well, if she's lethargic, you have to take her to the hospital. So at that time, the hospital on Camp Humphreys wasn't completed. So we had to go drive about 20 minutes up to an Air Force base and have her seen at that emergency room. Mm-hmm. So we took her in, and they, again, in the hospital, said they thought it was a virus. And finally, I had stayed home with the other 3 girls, and Jeff had scooped Adelyn off the couch because she couldn't even, at this point, she wasn't even coherent. Yeah. She wasn't even doing basic functions like walking. So Jeff scooped her up, took her to the hospital, drove her there. She was kind of in and out of consciousness in the car, is what Jeff had told me. So he took her in, and they just thought, again, it was this virus. And I happened to, for some reason, I got on my phone and I Googled type 1 diabetes symptoms, and I sent Jeff an article. He reviewed it, and then while the doctor came in and was saying, it's a virus, he said to them, can we please test her for diabetes? And they were hesitant. They said, I don't think that's what this is, but we'll do it. And a few minutes later, they came back in the room and said, you were right, she's a diabetic. So that's how her diagnosis happened. We were taken from the hospital by ambulance. I had a friend come up and watch the girls so I could go to the emergency room to be with Adelyn, and Jeff was going to come home and be with the kids. And I rode in the ambulance up with her into Seoul to Samsung Hospital there. And that's where she was in the hospital for about a week once we were out of that ER.
So I have a number of questions about that first part.
Okay.
And it'll give you a chance to regroup. It's a well-told story. Thank you. How much of a language barrier is there at the hospital? Like, do you and your husband speak Korean a little bit?
I could speak I could get by at the market is basically what I could do.
I see.
There is a language barrier, but Koreans are very good at English.
Okay.
They just don't, it's like any culture, if we go to another country, if I go to France, I'm not going to, even if I was fluent in French, I'm going to be hesitant to actually use it in conversation. Mm-hmm. So I think that was the piece, because everybody that I worked with, you're assigned a translator. So I had someone that they would speak in Korean, because that's their
Sure.
language of comfort, and the translator would translate it for me.
Oh, at work?
No, not at, well. So at work for Jeff, is that what you're asking?
I got lost for a second there, because you said you were assigned a translator just in your regular life, or
no, at the hospital.
At the hospital. I'm sorry.
Yes.
There was just that one piece that I missed. So okay.
Sorry.
So no, please don't be sorry. So there's I'm sure it was my fault. you don't realize that while you're talking, I'm also trying to formulate what we're going to say next. And once in a while I drift away and I'm like, oh, you know what I'm going to ask about? And then I started thinking about this South Korean zombie movie that I really liked. And I was like, I wonder how I can work this into the conversation, which is meaningless. And then I missed a key thing that you said there. Anyway, I apologize. So there's a translator at the hospital, and that makes total sense. Even though you feel like the hospital staff could have probably spoken to you.
There was a few moments where, you're assigned a translator and they come into the room when you have like education classes or your team of doctors comes in. And there would be a few moments where maybe she was running behind and they would speak to me in English. But I think they just weren't comfortable.
Yeah, I don't want to miss anything either, I would imagine.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So they could do it and they were very good at it. The team that I had would, after the meeting, they would say, thank you, for being so good about my English. They would always think that their English was poor. And it was phenomenal, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. They did very well. I could understand everything.
Well, I have to say, in your note, you say that her Adelyn's A1C at the time she was diagnosed was 17%. I'm fairly comfortable saying if you don't Google that article and push your husband, she probably doesn't make it. If they send her out of that hospital again, telling her that it's something else, especially with your description of her.
Yes, I don't think she would have made it either. I really do think that it was something. I don't know what it was about that moment where I just happened to pick up my phone and say, I really think we're missing something. And I asked about this, and it just was something that was, I remember we went on a trip around right before she was diagnosed. I took her to Everland, which is kind of like a Korean Disneyland. Mm-hmm. And it was maybe 40 minutes to an hour trip. And Adelyn, we had to stop twice there and twice on the way home for her to use the restroom. She just couldn't, in 40 minutes, she had to go twice. It was just something that was frequently urinating. It was not, something was off.
Right. She couldn't have been drinking that much.
No, yeah. She was definitely chugging water, but it was, there was just so many things that were off and she had all of those key symptoms. And then when we started, I could see her full pelvis by the time that we took her in. So it was like, this is not right. This is not healthy. Something's wrong.
Do you have a feeling for how much weight she lost during the time it took you to kind of figure this all out?
When she was, taken to Samsung, I think they weighed her in and she was under 40 pounds. She was about 38, 37 maybe. Right now she's well over 50. So it was a lot of weight.
Stark amount, yeah. And you said, she was getting taller, so it probably even looked.
Yeah, it was not good. I even had, it was to the point that I was taking pictures of her just to have it, so I could compare how much.
Oh, I see. Yeah, of course.
She was losing, just the amount of bone that was coming through.
I remember Arden gaining about 2 pounds in the first 24 hours she was on insulin.
Yeah.
Because she was in that scenario too. She was much younger, but she only weighed 19 pounds prior to us figuring it out. By the time we figured it out, she was like 17. And then she put the 2 pounds, like as soon as it's like you injected the insulin in her and she just, the weight went back on her, which was just really magical.
Yeah.
But yeah, she looked like, I said it on the podcast recently, like Arden looked like a runway model with a heroin problem. Like she was really, she had gotten to that like gaunt thing. And it is funny because as you were describing it, I thought I did all the same things you did. You're like, well, there's reasons for this. Like everything that happened, you were like, oh, I can see why this would happen. Instead of just thinking, this isn't normal and let's go to a hospital and bang on the door until someone fixes it. Like, why would we leave? You know what I mean? Like, why would I ever walk away until there was an actual answer found? But it's just the process. It's how it goes. And, it really is. It shows you how what happens next to most people happens, right? And you're going to talk about it after a while, but like, doctors don't tell you everything. You go home, it doesn't seem right, and you still you swallow. You know what I mean? You just swallow it. You're just like, okay, sure, I'll inject the insulin and then eat right away. And then I see my blood sugar spike right up. Oh, they said it's okay. I saw someone online say it the other day, like my blood sugar goes to like 280, but then it comes back and the doctor says that's what it's supposed to do. And right. And the person saying, I don't feel like that's right, but how do I trust myself? You know what I mean? Like, and how do you trust yourself during the diagnosis when you're like, hey, this really seems like diabetes? Like, no, that's a virus. You know, and you just go, okay, virus, thanks. And can you imagine, and I don't want you to, but I guess, you know, for the sake of the conversation, imagine had you not followed your instincts there and your daughter passed away.
I know. I think about it often.
Yeah, absolutely. Your husband owes you huge. And seriously, I'm seriously saved one of the kids. You're way ahead in the marriage right now. Whether you realize it or not, you could probably screw like 3 major things up. I don't even think he could say anything.
Right.
Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
I didn't look at it from that perspective, but I guess you're right.
I'm keeping score over here, so that's how I know. But yeah, you're way ahead. just so you know, you could probably stop cleaning. I'm going to say for 6 months. You know, if the cleaning's something you do. You want to cheat once? I think you get away with it. What do you think of that?
I like it.
You roll back home and you're like, hey, Jeff, remember the time I saved the kid? We're going to let this go.
I should probably throw that out every once in a while.
It could at least get you out of like some mundane task you don't want to do, right? Like, hey, why doesn't somebody who didn't save Adelyn come over here and pick up these toys? That's how I would roll. I really wouldn't, but it seems like so much fun to think about it that way to me. My brain gets a little off track. I don't want to apologize for it because I like how I am, but I was online the other day and someone said something to me and I responded in a way that I thought was fun. And then someone came on and said, like, man, you're not right. And I was like, no, it's funny. Like, don't you? And then I looked at it, I was like, yeah, I don't see anyone else answer things like this. There really is something wrong with me, but in a delightful way. So who cares, right?
Right.
Anyway, so you're at the Samsung Medical Center. All this is going on. How long did they keep you there? And by the way, is everything named Samsung in Korea? Okay, let's go to myomnipod.com/juicebox and find out what we see. myomnipod.com/juicebox. Well, I see that I can request a free experience kit at that very web address. So if you're using MDI and you're thinking about pumping, or if you have a pump and you're dreaming about what it might be like to be tubeless. Oh, did you not know? The Omnipod has no tubing. That you won't be connected to a wired controller, something that you'll have to clip to your belt or your bra or hide in your pants, or disconnect to take a shower or go swimming or to play sports. Wait a minute, you didn't know that? Now you do. The next step is to get a demo sent to your house, a free pod experience kit. They're just going to send it to you. Now, don't worry, it's not functioning, right? It's a non-functioning, but you can try it on and wear it. And I think you very well might learn what I did when I wore my free pod experience kit. Is that after it's on for a few minutes, you just don't notice it's there anymore. The next thing you know, you're going about your life. So whether or not you're a person living with type 1 diabetes or the parent or caregiver of someone who does, you owe it to yourself to check out the Omnipod. It's myomnipod.com/juicebox. Get the absolutely free pod experience kit sent to your house. There's no obligation. They're not going to hound you if you try it. So just check it out. It can't hurt. The Omnipod is one half of the irreplaceable technology that my daughter uses. Do you know what the other half is? In case you couldn't guess, it was the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor. I'm going to kind of keep going here with my URL trend. URL, dexcom.com/juicebox. Now, when you get there, you're going to find out everything you need to know about the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor. I'll tell you a little bit about it. 0 finger sticks. Glucose readings that are right on your smart device, Android or Apple. Customizable alerts and alarms. The ability to share your data with someone else. That could mean your sister in Poughkeepsie, or it could mean your child across the street at a play date. But someone with type 1 diabetes who's wearing a Dexcom G6 can share their data with a loved one or friend. I'm not even going to edit that out. That's my daughter's right there. We have a customized alarm set at 120. It means my daughter's blood sugar has just drifted above 120. We're going to take care of that right now with some insulin. That will avoid a high blood sugar that later will require a ton of insulin that will probably cause a low blood sugar later. Now, your results may vary, right? These are ours. But the truth is, knowing the speed and direction of your blood sugar is at the core of how you make good decisions with insulin. Dexcom.com/juicebox, or the links in your show notes, or at juiceboxpodcast.com. I cannot believe that thing beeped right then, and I wove it into the ad. I'm a genius. All right, let's get back to the show.
Yeah. Well, no, I shouldn't say everything, but Samsung has a very big influence. I mean, they have everything's air conditioners, like anything is Samsung. Mm-hmm. So
I love the televisions. I'm looking at one right now, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah. So we were at Samsung for about a week. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was maybe just shy of a week.
Do you think that's because of how far along she was, or also because they don't see type 1 that often?
So from my understanding, they don't see type 1 that often. I don't know if it's genetics. I don't know. Again, this is something that I was told. I'm not sure how accurate that statement is.
Sure.
But I don't think that it's as predominant as it is in the U.S. So, they kind of, in the first week, it was a very strong learning curve. They first started talking about, I had tons of questions, obviously. And, you've even mentioned it on a few of the podcasts where you're almost in like a haze.
Yeah.
So everything's being thrown at you, all of this information. Then you have the language barrier as well and the translator. And I felt like I was drowning. Like I felt like I was underwater, and then the translator would speak and my head would pop up and I could kind of understand. Then I'd go back underwater while they were, speaking. So it was very, it was hard for a while. But I finally think I got a grasp and I felt comfortable going home, I guess. Mm-hmm. But while we were at the hospital, the doctor that I had seen at Humphreys before we had left, she was a pediatrician there. She actually personally called me. Now, I don't know how she found out that we were at the hospital. I'm not sure if the emergency room reported that this was all going on. But she personally called me while we were at Samsung. And she talked to me for maybe an hour and said, I really feel like you should pursue going back to the States.
Okay.
And so it was with her. It was really her, because I hadn't even thought that far ahead at that point. I was still trying to understand injections and finger pokes and all of that, basic stuff.
Yeah.
We were still trying to figure out her Traceba and, if she was on Novo Rapid at that time. And so like all of those ratios and everything, there was still a lot going on. So it wasn't until I got back home that she asked to see me in her office with Adelyn. She wanted an immediate follow-up. And that's where all of the extra, we're going back to the States. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I guess what I meant to say is, while we were in the hospital, the staff started talking about pumps, insulin pumps, CGMs, things like that. And I know that the specs on the equipment in Korea don't match U.S. specs. So it was also, I think, an insurance issue, maybe. I'm not exactly sure. Because in the States, TRICARE pays for the supplies, but over there, everything is out of pocket.
Okay.
So I remember they showed me a CGM that was huge. It looked like an old pager almost. And they were like, well, this is, kind of explaining it to me and how it worked, and we could get it. But it was, the the day following my phone call with the pediatrician, I said, I don't know if we're going back to the States or not. And so they kind of said, well, I would advise that see what's going to happen and then come back if you're going to stay and get the equipment versus buying it, because they were the ones that told me it doesn't meet U.S. standards, so it won't operate there.
And so when you're in the hospital still, and you describe kind of drifting away, do you recall? Did you just go to a numb place, or were you overwhelmed? Was it like being in math class and not understanding? Was it like were you daydreaming about this not happening? Were you thinking about worse things? Do you remember what happens in that space? You may not.
I do remember. I just kept thinking, why her? Why Adelyn? Why did this happen to us? So it was more of a, I really struggled with it. I remember I cried so much that I remember asking the nurse the first day that she came in and gave her an injection before she ate breakfast, because they had her fast, so that they could, I guess, do some testing, monitor her, stuff like that. So by the next day, after we left the ER, went to Samsung. That whole entire time, overnight, they were fasting her, and she just kept waking up, and she was crying. She was so hungry. Finally, they sedated her so that they could give her some potassium, because, that burns going in. So they tried to give it to her before we left the ER, but she was screaming in pain. So they sedated her and they gave her the potassium, and that helped her get through the night. But by the time the next morning came, she was starving. So they came in to give her insulin, and I remember I just looked at the nurse and I was crying, and I said, so I have to do this to her for the rest of her life? And Adelyn looked up at me and she was like, oh, Mom, why are you crying? I think she had seen me cry so much in that short time that it was like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah. You're like, this lady
Pull
is
it
not
together.
I need someone here, and you got to really help me. I'm 6 and I'm hungry, and none of these people speak English, and I really would love it if someone here was on Adelyn's team. You know what I mean? I think it's it's an adage of parenting, right? There's a line between how much do you show them and how much do you buck up and do what you're supposed to do. And I'm a fan of somewhere in the middle. I like my kids to know I'm a real person, without them feeling the stress and anxiety of the things that I worry about. I think about, bills or how you're going to pay for college, that kind of stuff. And I want my son, for instance, to know that this, the college he's going to, it's not easy for us to pay for. And at the same time, I don't want him getting up every morning and thinking, oh, I better not screw this up because my parents are paying a lot of money for it. I want him somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. I like that your daughter sees that you care about her, but you got to stop short of when she thinks, oh, God, I got to grab one of these other adults and see if they'll take care of me. This woman just lost it. She's probably, my dad has gotten her pregnant so many times that she's probably tired, and what are we going to do? I cried during the first kind of like lesson from a nurse about counting carbs and then figuring out how much insulin to use during the ratio. Like, I just fell apart. And my wife was like cognizant enough to send the nurse out of the room. She said, give him a minute. Because at the moment he appears not to understand 7th grade math. So let's get him out, and I'm going to need this here because he's the guy that stays with the kids. So she cleared the room out. She's like, what's wrong? I'm like, I'm going to kill her. Like, I'm going to make a mistake with this math and I'm just going to kill her. Mm-hmm. And then what am I going to do? How am I going to turn to you and say, hey, look what I did. We met each other when we were kids and we have these 2 children in this house and everything was going great. And then she got diabetes, and then fast forward to me killing her. And, you're a nice person. You don't keep score in your head. But I know for a fact, if I kill one of my kids, my wife's bailing on me. Right. Aside of the part where I would really like Arden to stay alive, but I've always had that thought before diabetes. Like, even driving in the car with my son when he was little, I thought, I cannot have an accident and hurt this kid. She's just a girl I married. Like, you know what I mean? Like, when it comes down to picking, if I kill him, she's going to leave. Right. Why would she not? And I really, to be honest, she pays a lot of the bills. So I was like, I only kept my son alive to get the electric bill paid is what I'm saying. That was my key focus of being a stay-at-home parent. I wish that, anyway.
I do remember leaving the hospital. I basically I wagered with the staff, like, they were going to release us the night before, and traffic into Seoul is horrific. Like Highway 1, it's I think 6 lanes per side, maybe 8. I can't remember, but it's bumper to bumper traffic, and especially rush hour. So I'm thinking, I'm going to have this kid in the car, and how do I feed her? How do I give her an injection on the way home? So I just basically said, can I leave Saturday morning instead?
Around 4? There's no one outside. Well, I looked while we were talking. The population of South Korea is 51 million people.
And most of them are in Seoul.
And for perspective, there are 329 million people in the U.S. And South Korea is, not 7 times, larger than the U.S. There's a lot of people jammed into a very tiny space.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever listen to the podcast while you were there?
I did not actually. So
I thought I was meeting the people who download it from South Korea, but apparently you're not.
I'm sure,
you're not those people. So
no, but at the time I didn't have a diabetic while we were over there. I mean, it was. By the time Adelyn was diagnosed November 3rd, we left country December 17th.
You got out fast.
That is something that does not typically happen. And that was a lot to do with our doctor being on board, Jeff's chain of command being very supportive, and they would check on things for us. I mean, we were getting pushed through the system very quickly, this is not typical.
Right. So when you get home, I'm assuming you don't have a home in the U.S. at that point. It's not like there's a house at home somewhere that you're renting or a family member's living. You go to another base. Is that correct?
So before we left, Jeff was getting in contact with his branch manager, and they basically give you an assignment before you leave. You have to have a place to go, where you're headed. Mm-hmm. And they were, when a child, or anyone, I guess I shouldn't just say a child, but when someone in your family, if you're an active duty service member, has some form of disablement or disability or disease, you qualify for what's called EFMP, which is an Exceptional Family Member Program. So Adelyn is now an EFMP qualified member of our family, and so that basically it's an identifier on Jeff's paperwork that says, we can. Because of that, we can only go to certain places now. So they basically give you options that has care for her.
Okay. That's great.
So they gave him a list, and I had done a little bit of research before I had left. My good friend Kathy was helping me kind of see possibilities of places we could go and where care was. And I had in my mind that I wanted to come back to Fort Bragg. We were here before we left for Korea. Mm-hmm. And they offered us a couple of places. And I said to Jeff, I would really like to get back to Fort Bragg because I have a support system here. I had left friends. I was familiar with the area. So I knew going into this, newly diagnosed, that I needed that. So he got with his branch manager and asked if there was anything available here, which is not like my husband at all. We usually go wherever the job is. We're not very selective with that. So he basically asked, and they assigned him here. So that's how we ended up back here. But when we left Korea, Jeff and I are both from Michigan. So we had stored like his truck, things like that at our parents' homes in Michigan. So we took a direct flight out of Seoul into Detroit, picked up our belongings, and then headed down to North Carolina.
Wow, that's a lot. All while not really understanding diabetes at this point and trying to keep
Correct.
Together. I have a lot of feeling for you, because I was not good at even getting in the car and going to like the grocery store without pre-planning for like 2 hours before I would take Arden out. I'd be like getting her blood sugar in the exact place where I thought it'll stay here. We can get across town.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like if you would have told me to get in the car in Detroit and drive to North Carolina, I've been like, maybe in a couple of years.
I think, the car trip down was a lot easier than the 16-hour plane ride back, because that was terrifying.
Does a plane make you feel trapped? Like if something happens, we're stuck on this plane?
Oh, I was so worried.
Yeah.
I remember when we went to Korea that someone on the plane had some sort of medical emergency, and they, got on the intercom and asked for any medical providers if they could come up to whatever row, seat, whatever, And so I kept thinking, what if that happens to us?
Yeah.
I have to be very aware of where my child is, what row we're in, what seat we're in,
You overthought all of that. Yeah. Because you really did overthink all of it. Because now you would fly now and it wouldn't be such a big deal, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Back then, without the tools, it really
Oh,
is.
yeah. And I had like a year's supply of insulin. I really did. My pediatrician, before we left at Humphreys, told me, we had a follow-up with Samsung about a month after diagnosis. So it was beginning of December. They wanted to see her back. So I think it was like the first week of December we were up there. And before we went, the pediatrician said, make sure that they give you a 3-month supply of insulin before you get on the plane, because, there will be a gap between your care, establishing a doctor or things like that. So I went and I asked for a 3-month supply, but they handed me, the pens come in those boxes where there's multiple pens in a box, and they handed me like 3 or 4 boxes. And so I had tons of insulin that I'm walking on a plane. I'm thinking, how am I going to keep this cold? What happens? Will they let me on the plane with this? I have all these needles in my bag. It was just
a lot of questions.
A lot going on.
A lot of paranoia, a lot of questions.
Yes.
I hear you. I really do. So you make it home. There's actually great episodes in the podcast of people who are like really world travelers with diabetes, and they talk about how, with a tiny bit of pre-planning and just understanding things a little bit, how easy it really is, that it's not much.
Yeah. Now I could get back on the plane and I would feel completely comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's, I know how to, I think I could go anywhere at this point. Seriously. But back then, like I said, I couldn't leave the house. So you get home in, right. Wow. Even that, I didn't realize just now, that sucks. Like you had to come home like right before Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you celebrate and so you're like, isn't that interesting? The leap I made. I'm like, you're in the Army and you're from Michigan. You're a Christian. And so I wish you could have watched the synopsis make connections in my head. I was like, oh, it's comfortable to say. And now that I said it out loud, it's less comfortable. But that is how my brain works, in case you're wondering. I just leapt through that very quickly. Plus, you had 4 kids. No self-respecting Jew. So it's just not in that quick succession like that. Anyway, and so you're rolling in stateside just a couple of days before Christmas. Now, I have a tiny bit of experience with this rush, because one year we built a house, and we bought this tiny little rancher, and it was junk, and the plan was always to knock it over and start, because the land was what we wanted. And Arden gets diagnosed, right as we're thinking of like doing the work. So no lie, we had a construction person there moving things around, like walls and support inside of our home to facilitate the next step of the process. Okay. And one of the things we had done to get ready for the construction was we had the front stairs to our house and the sidewalk completely taken out and the door moved to another position. And then Arden was diagnosed. For years, my children had to jump out the front door to go to school because Arden was diagnosed, and then everything stopped while we figured out diabetes, So anyway, we finally get our house built many, many years later. Arden was diagnosed in 2006, and we built our house in 2012. So for 6 years, I was the person in town that didn't have a sidewalk out front and whose door didn't line up with any sort of pathway. And the pizza guy would just like roll through the front yard. You know what I mean? Like it was horrible. And we built this house, but we couldn't afford to build it and to relocate. So it's a long story, but we had gotten the money all of a sudden out of nowhere for the construction. That money did not include relocation. And we were screwed. We were going to have to skip it and not do it. I said to my wife, I'm like, Kelly, there is no way we are not building this house. And so one day I called her at work and I said, this weekend we're going to go and buy a huge travel trailer and park it in the backyard, and we're going to live in it during the construction because we can put $1,000 down on it, pay some small payment a month on it, and then we'll sell it right away when we're finished with it. And there's a whole story of what it's like to live in a trailer with a dog and 2 children and diabetes for 6 months. But anyway.
Oh, so you did do it. Okay.
Oh, we did it. Yeah. Except the construction then, of course, I know now always takes longer than you expect. And so we are the last 6 weeks in that trailer, it's freezing outside. And those things are not made for the weather. We have like electric heaters going, like it's a fire hazard, I'm sure, we'd get up in the morning. I could hear my wife get in that tiny little shower and she's like, like in and out in like 2 seconds. The water was free, everything, right? But we moved back into the house about 10 days before Christmas. And the rush to try to make a real Christmas was like horrible. And I wondered if that happened to you. Did you get home like, because you seem like a really good mom. Like, did you get home, get back into North Carolina? Was your next thought, I have to make a Christmas for these people? Like,
so it's funny that you bring this up because I had planned, some of the girls' gifts and things like that. And I actually ended up returning them all. And I started ordering things online and sending them to my mother-in-law's house. My parents, what they call snowbirds, so they leave Michigan. They stay in Michigan for 6 months and live in Florida for 6 months. So they had already headed down to Florida. We actually have a travel trailer that we store at their house. So we had to go over there and pick up the travel trailer, but we ended up staying at Jeff's parents' house and doing Christmas there. So she already had it set up, and I'm blessed with an amazing mother-in-law. And so she did, I think it sparked happiness that we were coming back and she was going to have Christmas with all of us, So it was a big thing. All of us were at my mother-in-law's for Christmas. So myself, Jeff, the girls, his sister Jamie, her husband, their children. So it was a big thing we did. They always have a family Christmas party, so we had to go to that. So felt very normal. But I was able to step into that. Now, if I had to
start from scratch,
it would have been completely different.
Well, yeah. Well, she owes you too. I mean, 4 kids. You know what I mean? Like at some point, she must have even called Jeff at some point and been like, "Can you cut that girl a break?" Like, and you just, you kept plugging away. No, there's no pun in there at all. And I think she owes you is what I'm saying. Like seriously, 4 kids. If she's going to listen to this at some point, this woman really came through for you with the grandchildren.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I think she knew that it was something on my mind, that I was trying to still make it normal. Mm-hmm. So she was willing to and Carol goes overboard at Christmas. There's no way around it. So it was nice that she was already set up and we were good. We were taken care of.
All right. So eventually then you end up back at Bragg where you're at now. And you're speaking to me from there. And you, I'm assuming, settle into a life of managing diabetes. And how did you find it to be in the beginning?
So coming back, we have this funny little story that we came back to Fort Bragg again because we came right back to the neighborhood we lived in before. And in fact, we rented a home, and our neighbors to that home were actually at the time trying to sell the house we're in right now. And so the movement cycle had already come and gone, and it was sitting empty. So I contacted them because we're friends, and I said, Hannah, would you be willing to rent the home to us? And because she knew us, she was like, absolutely, anything I can do to help you guys. Because, again, we were friends. She understood what was going on. we were communicating from Korea at that point. Once we found out we were coming back to Fort Bragg. So we actually are living in the house next door to the house we rented before. So when we moved back, I would have to the girls, we're in a very family friendly community and lots of children, lots of outside play. So when they were like riding their bikes, for example, and the kids had to use the bathroom, they would like jump off their bikes and run to the old house. And Jeff and I would have to sit outside for like the first month and scream at them, "Not our house."
That's not our house.
And they would have to the light bulb would go off and they'd be like, "Oh, that's right. We live in this house now," and would come in. But we also, with another reason why we chose to come back is my best friend actually lives across the street. And another peaceful piece to this is that I'm sorry, you're going to hear our cat right now. I'm not sure why she's meowing, but
I genuinely thought one of your children had fallen and died. So
nope,
I'm happy to know it's the cat, actually.
Yes, it's Adelyn's cat. We had to get a cat. That was Addie's, the moment of, hey, I have diabetes. You're going to sympathize with me and get me a cat, which I'm allergic to.
Wow, she was able to pull that off at 6?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, while still in the hospital, Jeff came home with a cat.
The kid went right to "I need a cat" when she saw you guys crying?
Yeah, pretty much it's how that went down.
Listen,
oh, yeah.
Oh, anyone listening, 8, 10, 20 years from now, don't marry this girl. She's got a plan. You know what I mean? She's like, look, they look sad. She got out her list. She's like, what's on the top of my 6-year-old list? Ooh, cat.
Cat.
Mom's allergic. Whatever.
It doesn't matter.
Wait a minute. Did you fly from Korea with a cat? You didn't, right?
Yes, I did.
Wait,
and
what?
That was also, yes.
Oh,
yes, a kitten. And I mean, she was just a kitten. She had just, was old enough to get her rabies shot and things like that. I mean, she screeched the entire way.
Okay.
We were those people. It was awful.
Hold on one second. What's Jeff's job in the military? Is he a test dummy? How did he come through with a cat in Korea?
Jeff is an aviation officer, so he flies.
Yeah. Sounds like he's got a heart made out of pudding. That kid said cat, and he ran right to find a cat.
Well, it was more me. She had asked for it, and then there was this adoption thing. It just all lined up. The stars were all aligned, and we ended up with this cat.
I put you back in that scenario right now. The person you are today. That kid goes, "I want a cat." You look right at her and go, "I don't care." And then that's the next thing. You just jumped, right? Would you?
Now she can't pull that on me anymore. It was just that weak moment.
Well, she blew all of her currency on that cat. She doesn't realize because she's so little, but that was she overreached there. She doesn't.
Yep, she did.
Oh, well, whatever. Good. Now she can live. I swear, I wish you guys could all. My default is no. If my children are like, "Hey, Dad, the house is on fire. Should we go outside?" I go, "No." And then we think about it. I say no to everything. I start at no, and if you get me to yes, huge win for you. I would never. My son said he was at school the other day, and some kid was like, "Hey, we should just go do this." And my kid's like, "My dad won't pay for that." And he's like, just, you have a card, let's just do it. He's got his bank card. And my son was like, "Oh my God, no. He'll drive up here and take me out of school over $50. You have no idea. I can't do that." And I was proud. I was like, that's right. When Arden goes clothes shopping, she picks out 3 outfits. And as she's heading to the register, she stops and puts one back. And my wife goes, "I feel bad. You've made her feel bad about money." I'm like, I see that exactly the opposite as you, but okay. I see that as her being careful with what she's spending. Anyway, your kid wouldn't have got a cat if she was my daughter. I would have actually laughed at her. I would have pulled people into the room, but "Hey guys, everybody listen to this story. My daughter thinks just because she has diabetes, we're buying a cat." Oh my God, that's delightful. You're a pushover. I like you. Okay, so we're home and we,
Yep. So we moved in next door or across the street from my best friend, who they actually have their nephew is a type 1 diabetic. So it was a relief for me because they were aware already how to manage Addie in a sense. They understood it. Most people don't understand, and on the level that you need them to.
Yeah.
So it was extremely. It wasn't as difficult as what I thought it was going to be.
And you're using a meter or pens or pump, a CGM. What did you settle into when you got
Yes. So I had, she was using a meter. She was getting finger pokes. And I mean, it was to the point that I was so nervous with everything that was going on. I mean, just in that 1 month time span of, we're in another country, we're getting on a plane, we're taking this huge car trip, like we're moving to a new house. So it felt like I was testing her probably every 2 hours. Her poor little fingertips were just raw.
Yeah.
By the time that we ended up getting a CGM, we came to North Carolina, and on post, you usually go on post to be seen for your health care, but they were overstrengthed. So they refer you off post, and you can see a medical provider that accepts TRICARE. So I found a really reputable pediatrician, and then had to go in to get a referral for a pediatric endocrinologist. Mm-hmm. So they, at first, thankfully, our pediatrician, her best friend's daughter is a type 1. So she's also aware at this point. So that was super helpful. And she had come to, in the first meeting with her and, evaluating Adelyn, was saying, I think you should go to UNC, which we had gone to UNC before when we were stationed here for my second daughter, Kenzie, needed to go to some specialty care up there. And I knew it was quite a drive, about an hour and a half to the main campus. Mm-hmm. So at this point now I'm like, well, I don't want to be that far away from the doctor. So I said to her, like I said earlier, I had done a minimal research on whether there was care here for Adelyn or not. So I knew that there was a doctor here in the immediate, like, Fayetteville area. So I said, can I see the doctor at Cape Fear? And she, was kind of like, yeah, sure. But she did say, I want you to know that if anything happens to Adelyn and you have to take her to the hospital, I want you to go direct to UNC if possible. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay. And flash forward, I go to Adelyn's first visit here at Cape Fear for the endocrinologist. And the doctor, the doctor was fine. It's just she's the only doctor in our area. She's the only pediatric endocrinologist for all of the Fayetteville area.
Every kid and every person that needs her, yeah.
So, I mean, I remember the first visit, she was very, very helpful in getting us a CGM. She said, you need this. And, I come in and saying, can I have it? I'm finger poking her every 2 hours because I'm uncomfortable. And she said, you need it. So she got us that very quickly. But I do remember, obviously it's all new and uncomfortable. And, I didn't understand it. And she said, if there's a video to how to put it on, you can watch the video if you have any problems. She kind of, I don't want to paint her in a poor light, but she said, I'm just too busy. You're not going to be able to come in here and see me if you have any problems with it. I can't make time for that.
You figure it out.
And yeah. And so I just remember standing there like, okay. And she had, Adelyn's HA1C had, by the time from diagnosis, she was 17%. Mm-hmm. The month later, when we went back at the follow-up in Korea, she was like 9 something. Mm-hmm. And then we got back to Fort Bragg. Sorry, I'm like losing my mind. Mm-hmm. We got back to Fort Bragg, and that first visit, her HA1C was like 8%.
Okay.
And so she was declining, and that was great. But I had in my mind, Jeff is very research based, so he was watching some like YouTube channel on diabetes and like how they were doing it, and so I was aware of what a quote unquote good HA1C was. And I'm a perfectionist, so I was like, we're going to get her there. I want her to be in a really good range. So I remember I walked into that first appointment and I was expecting everything to get changed. I just thought, I knew,
Her
like you had
A1C
said,
is not 5.5, so let's make some adjustments now. But you were
right.
feeling like that.
And I was seeing, there were so many times where, I mean, I was finger poking her, so I didn't get the graphs, I didn't get the arrows, the number like
Yeah.
you get with her Dexcom now, but I knew well enough that I was like, why is she going up to 300 every time she eats? And you're telling me that you want her in this tighter range. And, when we left Korea, to be on the safe side, they told me don't ever let her, go under, I can't remember what number they said, but they were basically telling me the 200 mark was a good target, right? Keep her around 150, 200. That's great.
Okay.
And then when I went into this appointment, I just knew something was off because, again, my husband's watching all this stuff on how to figure out Addie's disease. And I'm seeing all this, all these other success stories. And I'm like, okay, so this isn't right. Something's off. And I expected her to help me change it. But she kind of just said, you're doing great. I'm not changing anything. See you in 3 months. And I remember I walked out and I was like, this doesn't feel right. Something is, I know she can do better. And I'm still not comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So we get the CGM and I was on Facebook or something. I was on a page and your podcast was suggested. And so I just decided, I'd never listened to podcasts before. So I was like, all right, I'll give it a whirl. And so listening to some of the stories that you had featured on the podcast, it's where you started talking about pre-bolus. I had never even been told to pre-bolus. Just that in and of itself was brought down Adelyn's stuff. I could keep her in a better range. She wasn't spiking to 300 with her food.
Yeah.
I was told, give her the insulin, let her eat, and then she'll come back down, like you had mentioned earlier. And I knew it wasn't right. So I finally called our pediatrician back and said, hey, can I go to UNC? I'll do that. I need to make a change. This isn't a good fit for us. So
Worth the ride.
Right. And so she gave us the referral and now we're at UNC. And between the information I've received from the podcast and the team of doctors, she's doing really, really well.
Oh, I'm glad. What is well? Where have you gotten to? Are you okay to say?
So her next appointment is October 2nd, but the last appointment, her A1C was 5.7.
Oh, congratulations. You did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did it. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I could do it without the CGM. And I don't know if I could do it if I would have stayed where I was and accepted, okay, I'm not doing anything wrong. We're not going to make any changes. Everything's great.
Yeah. Yeah, they said it was okay, so it's okay. You just have to trust yourself at some point. I mean, honestly, you basically told me a story about seeing how sick your daughter was and pushing through and getting them to test her for diabetes. And then you saw that what you thought, what they were telling you was right about her care didn't look right. You pushed through and, that worked out as well. So I say, trust your gut. I say it all the time, actually. It's a big part of this is that, is that idea that when you see something that doesn't make sense, you should say something. You should do something. You can't just stand still and go, this doesn't seem right. I hope this doesn't hit me. Oh, look, it hit me. I can't believe that. It's just, you got to move. You got to do something. And you did it. That's really cool. I mean, I'm really, it's very encouraging for me to hear you say that because, I get everyone's notes and letters and, messages and people are in different variations of this process. And at any point along the line, if you give up, you'll get stuck right where you are. And then eventually you'll drift backwards. So you have to push through till you get to the point where it's just like, it's easy now. And then, of course, I don't mean easy like easy. I just mean like it's old hat. Like you do this thing and you get the blood sugar you expect. Like that kind of stuff. And when it goes wrong, you just, troubleshoot it and you figure it out.
That's really cool.
I
mean, Jeff even listens to the podcast now. And it was just the other day with Addie going back to school now, we've had to make some changes because her summer, routine is different than her school routine. So our numbers have needed to be tweaked a little bit. And I would, I'm basically talking out loud to myself. I mean, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, where you're looking at the PDM. I'm like, all right, I know I need to change and I'm blah, blah, blah to myself. And Jeff's like, just change it. He's like, just like what Scott says on the podcast, like, don't wait, do it now. I'm like, well, okay.
That's great. And it makes me feel bad about considering calling this episode Jeff Bought a Korean Kitten. So, so I'm very, very close to that. I've made notes. And it's a contender, just so you know. I just keep thinking, like, it's such a wonderful image of, parental love, or that feeling guys have. I don't know if women completely understand it. Like, when you guys look upset, we scramble in our brains. You know what I mean? Like, we're like, oh, how do we fix this? And I know everyone says that. It's like, but it's not just guys ignoring the world and being like, I'll just say something that'll make this better. You have an internal feeling like, this woman that I really love is upset and I need to fix it. And I'm imagining that there had to have been some common sense in him while he was standing there with that kitten and thinking, I really shouldn't do this. But then he just was overwhelmed by how much he cared about you guys, and he shows up with a kitten.
It didn't help that he had the other 3 with him when he adopted this cat either. It was like,
it's really unfair.
I'm sure the feeling of this, I should not be doing this right now, was going through like his mind. But of course, all 3 of the other children are there going, "Oh, Dad,"
Yeah, you guys, you're much too nice. That's what I've decided. You're very nice. I don't even know. There's almost nothing I think my children could say to put me in that situation where I'd be like, yeah, you're right, it's good. I don't have that in me at all. I have it in other places, not there. I defend my own happiness first. Does he know you're allergic to kittens when he buys this kitten, or is that something you found out afterwards?
No, we knew, but I don't know what we were thinking. We should just get off the subject of the cat.
No, this whole episode to me is about buying that kitten, just so you know.
Yeah, we were in a very, very bad place.
No, I and I highlighted a little bit to kind of listen. I highlighted a little bit because I want medical professionals to hear your story and recognize that when they're standing in front of you in a classroom or in a hospital room and trying to explain this whole new world to you, and you're standing there stoically and you're listening, the doctor's like, oh, they got it. They didn't get it. They're doing stupid things they shouldn't be doing. They can't think. They're quietly in their head wondering, why did this happen? Like, and then you send them out the door and you act surprised that they didn't, pick up more of it. And I'm not saying that you can stop people from being upset in a scenario like that, but you can recognize that it's happening and spend a little more human time with them to get them somewhere. That's what this podcast does. And I'm a little lit up about it right now because I see somebody I know who has some sway in this community, and they're partnering with a government agency to talk about how to talk about this with newly diagnosed people. Like, how do you get to people and get them the right information? And I'm seeing people talk to them, and it's all the same bull over and over again. Like the stuff I've been hearing for 20 years. Like, here's what's important. This is important. That's what's important. I'm telling you right now that what's important is solid information that's easy to understand, that you can put into practice immediately and see results so that you can build on it. It's not all of the stuff, it's not the damn Pink Panther book. Like that's not what's going to help anybody. Seriously, I don't know how many people have to listen to this podcast and have your experience before someone in the medical community hears it and says, hey, you know what? We should probably just tell them what they need to know in a way they can understand. And,
I think it was helpful too that, on many of the episodes you've talked about just doing it on your own. I think I had to get comfortable with that and say, okay, yes, I have medical care. If something were to ever happen, I feel comfortable taking her to the emergency room and letting them handle it at that point because I'm not familiar with that. But the day-to-day, I don't really contact her team ever. I just make the changes on my own. I don't.
And doctors will say it to you. Hey, some will. Some good doctors will say, look, you're going to have to get comfortable and make adjustments. But that's a different scenario. You standing in a cold room with a doctor aside, saying, this is on you. That feels different than hearing me say it. And so you need a person, in my situation, speaking directly to other people so that they can be comfortable, so they can see themselves in it. You know what I mean? And not just feel like a guy just told me to do something that there's no way I can do, because it's what it sounds like when a doctor tells you. And then I don't want to downplay what I'm doing here, but you come on and you're listening to this, a regular guy here, and and he's doing it. I genuinely believe that people listening should think, if this guy's doing it, I could do it, because there just is nothing particularly special about me. And I do it by not being scared, by being the person who would have said no to 3 crying girls about a kitten, just by kind of standing up and having a backbone and saying, I'm not going to put up with this. I don't know the answer, but I'll figure it out. And so now all the things that you guys hear now on the podcast that seem like, I don't know how to put it, but like they seem like staples in the community, at least for those of you listening, these ideas, just remember that they all started with me thinking, I'm not going to let this happen. And now I'm going to figure out how to stop it. And with no direction whatsoever, because I was not smart enough to Google anything. I don't listen to the doctor. I very much got in my own head and broke this all apart, which is now, I think, why I understand it well enough to explain it easily. But you can do that too. Like you can, I hate to say think outside of the box, because that just sounds, trite, but like there's a way to reverse engineer problems and to remember that your first inclination comes from your fear. Like, you know what I mean? Like the first thing you think is like defense, like, oh, I want to make sure this doesn't happen. I want to make sure this doesn't happen. I flipped it around and I thought, I want to make sure that this happens. Like forget being scared. I want to be bold. I want to figure it out. And that's why I now talk in t-shirt slogans on a podcast, which I'm glad helps people. But I really think that, better direction, better tools, easy to understand, repetitiveness. You can't let that go. Like, when people always want to ask me, like, which podcast will tell me exactly how to do this? And I tell them, look, I know there's a lot of episodes, but just listen to all of them, because eventually something will come up that will stick to you. And I can't know, what Sarah Beth will hear to make her feel good versus what Jeff will hear versus what the rest of you listening will hear. Like you all need to hear something different. So I got to keep prattling on until I cover all of you. Like that is sort of how it makes me feel when I'm recording it. Like it's why I like having free flowing conversations, because they don't lead me to say the same thing over and over again. And, I'm just really thrilled that this worked out so well for you. And how old is she now? Tell me a little bit about what's going on with her life, and then I'll let you get back to yours.
She's 7. She's doing really well. I hope that we continue to see results. She just actually, in July, she ended up going on the Omnipod. And so we've been fooling with that, learning that system, which was a relief for me. I had mastered MDI. Mm-hmm. I would like to say, I shouldn't say I had mastered it. I'd like to think that I mastered it. We were doing really well. I mean, she got those A1C results that was on MDI. That was not with a pump.
Yeah.
So now that she has that, I remember there was a time where she didn't want the injections. She would do it breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then she'd do a lot of cheese sticks for snacks, or, something very low carb. So because she didn't want the shot. Gotcha. And she had said to me one day, she just broke my heart because she wanted something. And I said, you can have that. You just have to, she started out by saying, you don't let me eat anything. Mm. And it just hurt so bad because she could have it. She just didn't want the shot that went along with it.
Of course.
So we finally, I went into the doctor and said, I really would like to get her on a pump, because this is now what I'm struggling with. She realizes, she recognizes what's going on and doesn't want it. So, and I don't want it to, become this piece for her. I want her to be normal.
Yeah.
So,
I try to remind people that, you don't want an eating disorder and type 1 diabetes, and you don't want to create that kind of an adversarial relationship with food. And that's exactly what that is. When she starts saying, I'd rather not eat if I have to do this, then you got to find another way. right away. And that's also what helped me. Believe it or not, that's what, when I talk about doing like over bolusing a meal that you can't pre-bolus for, I started figuring that out when Arden said something similar one day she's like, hey, I'm hungry. And I was like, great, just, let's bolus this much and like 10 minutes from now you can eat it. And then she said, never mind. And, and I was like, okay, she doesn't even want to wait the 10 minutes. Not in this moment. She's okay with it other times, but in this moment she doesn't want to. So instead of pushing, I just thought, well, how do I stop this from being a problem? And, then I just did that math about putting in too much insulin to cover not just the food, but the spike that's going to try to happen and the number that's going to, I just sort of extrapolated out. I did all that. I was like, well, I think if I did this much right here and she eats, maybe the spike still won't happen. And when that happened, I was like, oh, wow, look, I got around another problem, and kept her from feeling like she couldn't say that she was hungry. So I love that you did that. Good for you. You were terrific. You really are. And we went way over time, so I'm sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay.
Did you end up being nervous the whole way through?
No, I would say, really it was a lot to do with the podcast. Like it was other people's stories, having that connection, knowing that it was possible, and then being able, I can't remember exactly which one, but you've said it multiple times, but the focusing on being afraid of insulin. There was a point where I was afraid, but it's funny because I talk to Adelyn's providers now, and I have the opposite. I saw what happens to a kid with super high blood sugar, right? I see the effects of that, and that scares me more than the low. So often people are scared of their children going low. I've even seen people treat blood sugars that are like 80, 90 because they're like, oh, that's too low. But not that that's wrong. I don't want to make it seem like that's what they're comfortable with, but I'm not. So it's kind of like if I see, anything above like 150, Adelyn, her whole persona changes. We jokingly sometimes, I shouldn't probably say this, but we say that she turns psycho-glycemic. She just becomes this raging person when she's high, and it's harder to get through to her. So it's stressful to see the numbers, and then it's also stressful to deal with the type of her personality that evolves from this high blood sugar. So I hate high numbers. I would rather deal with a low and give her a juice box or, a sweet of some sort than have the high.
Sarah Beth, not only am I glad you shared that with people, but you just saved Jeff on the cat title, because Psyco-glycemic is probably going to be the title of this episode. You really pulled his butt out of the fire right in the 9th hour. Look at you. Excellent. 11th hour. Excuse me. I forgot the saying. But you really came through, unless you don't want that to...
Oh, I don't care what you title it. You do your own thing.
I got another note the other day. Someone's like, I needed an episode on this. It would be helpful if the titles had something to do with the content. And I was like, too bad. Just listen to them. You'll figure it out. No, seriously. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure.
Thanks so much to Sara for coming on and sharing her story. And thank you, Dexcom and Omnipod, for sponsoring this episode. Please check out those links, dexcom.com/juicebox and myomnipod.com/juicebox. In mere moments. It'll probably take longer than moments, but in no time at all, let's say, you could be wearing the world-class Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor and the amazing tubeless insulin pump called Omnipod. Just have to get started. You're looking for results like you're hearing about from people. These are some of the tools that some of those people are using. You could be some of those people too. Last little thing before I go. Like I said, I'm speaking in Atlanta this weekend. It's on February 29th. For those of you who snagged tickets, I can't wait to meet you. Please come up and say hello. And for those of you who didn't get tickets in time, I know you're not used to a Type 1 Nation event selling out, but you bring Scott down there, you add Jenny Smith, these tickets are not going to last. Anyway, I hope to see you. If you're in Wisconsin, I will be there Thursday, March 26th from 5 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. doing a 3.5-hour talk. It's going to be a talk followed by a Q&A. I'm flying all the way to Wisconsin. I want that room nice and full. Okay? These you can find these links at ardensday.com/events. After that, I'm taking a little break to watch my son play some baseball. But I'll be back at it on Saturday, May 30th at the Touched by Type 1 event in Orlando, Florida. And then I've got something coming up in August at the JDRF Type 1 Nation event in Virginia. I'll be in Richmond. That's Saturday, August 22nd. I think there's a couple of other things that are going to get put on the calendar between now and then, but for now, that's all I have booked. And trust me, I'm getting tired of flying places, so please come see me before I'm too old for this. I got sick the last time I flew. There was a kid in the back of the plane. I sat down and I heard it right away. I was like, that's it. I'm dead. Sure enough, lost my voice. Did you heard it in the last episode, right? Where I'm doing the promos and I'm like, I couldn't even get like my words out. Terrible. I'm better now. Thank God. I'm going to Atlanta in 5 days to speak for 4 hours. And 2 days ago, I couldn't speak on the telephone. So I've been resting my voice, which is probably something you can't imagine and something my family seemed kind of happy about. They were like snickering at me when the doctor said I had to rest my voice if I was going to make it to Atlanta. But I will be there. Will you? I'll be back at the end of the week with some technology news I think you're going to enjoy hearing about.